So I'll ask you, Dr. Timmy, based on your knowledge, your training, your experience, based on everything you reviewed in this case, do you have an opinion within a reasonable degree of forensic psychological certainty whether or not Ms. Powell did in fact suffer a severe mental disease on the date of the offense?
It is my opinion, held to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty, that at the time of the offense, Ms. Powell was suffering from acute symptoms of schizoaffective disorder, depressive type. At the time of the alleged offense, Ms. Powell was suffering from symptoms that were so severe that it is my opinion she did not appreciate the wrongfulness of her actions at that time.
Court TV Live, your front row seat to justice. I'm Julie Grant, and we are in the final stages of the mother-stabbed murder case. 23-year-old defendant Sidney Powell is accused of murder stemming from a brutal altercation with her mother. Her defense is that she's not guilty by reason of insanity. Will the jury believe that? That is the question. Now, the state's expected to begin the rebuttal case any minute now. We're going to go there live together when the judge is on the bench. In the meantime, let's get you a look at the background of this case. Here's Court TV legal correspondent Chanley Painter.
23-year-old Sidney Powell is facing murder charges in the March 2020 stabbing death of her mother, Brenda. Sidney was a former high school honor roll student at St. Vincent's High School in Akron, Ohio. But she struggled once she was in college and her grades took a dive. The University of Mount Union, where she was a scholarship student, suspended her and evicted her from her dorm. She kept it a secret for months.
Ms. Powell knew of her dismissal, but everybody else in Ms. Powell's life had no idea what was going on. Because Ms. Powell hid that. She hid that from her friends, from her family. She hid that and lied to her parents, Stephen and Brenda. According to everybody else, Ms. Powell was still a student at Mount Union. Her grades were okay. Her scholarship was not at risk. She was doing fine. But in reality, things were much different for her.
Her parents eventually discovered the truth. Brenda Powell called school administrators to find out more. The conversation barely got started when the attack occurred.
There was a very large or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud, accompanied by a pretty loud scream.
The whole time I kept saying, hello, hello, Brenda, can you hear me, right? And ultimately, once the sound had gotten closer and we heard several more of the banging sounds, the phone clicked and went off.
Investigators say Brenda Powell was bludgeoned with a cast iron skillet and stabbed more than 30 times. Most of those injuries were to the head and neck.
You don't typically see that. Certainly you don't see it at someone around that age in terms of the offender's age. And this is just a troubling, unfortunate, disappointing thing to have happen.
We are back on the record in State versus Sidney Powell.
Sidney Powell has pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Her defense attorney says she was suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia and was in the throes of a psychotic break at the time of the vicious attack.
This evidence that you're going to see screams out insanity. The brutality of this incident screams out insanity. The lack of a motive screams out insanity.
That was Chanley Painter reporting there for us. As we wait for court to begin, I want to bring in my guests. Joining me from Los Angeles, forensic psychiatrist, body language expert, Dr. Carol Lieberman, and in Nashville, retired police sergeant Melissa Pinkleton. Wonderful to see you both. Good Monday morning to you. Let's start with a clip. This is from one of the defense witnesses. This defense team brought in not one, not two, but three expert witnesses to testify to Sidney Powell being insane at the time that she stabbed her mother to death. And this is the first of those witnesses, I believe maybe the second of those witnesses. This is Robin Belcher, forensic psychologist. Let's listen to what she's sharing.
In most cases where there are allegations of mental state at the time of the offense, somebody will have a long history of psychosis. They will have hospitalizations in their background. They will have significant trauma in their childhoods. They will have histories of violence and non-adherence with treatment plans and things like that that are more symbolic or that go hand in hand more frequently with these kinds of situations. In this case, all of that seems to be absent. And so that was very interesting to me. By all accounts, this family was an intact family, a very close and loving family, and so this is an atypical case.
Let's talk about the fact that there were no risk factors, nothing to send up some big red flags to let anybody know this could happen. Dr. Carroll, would you speak to that aspect of it, please?
Well, yes. You know, they're witnesses. This case is just really getting to me because, I mean, there are so many things that are screaming. I mean, here he's saying he could almost be an expert for the prosecution. He's saying this is a very atypical case, which is true. You know, there's something obviously was going on with her during the time that she was doing so badly in college as compared to high school. And yes, as I said before to you, this is the age that schizophrenia can first show itself, but not in this way. There is usually that kind of a history. And I just hope the jury, you know, first of all, it's so interesting that the defense has had experts, except for the one who's currently treating her, a psychiatrist who has giving her medication, but their experts have all been psychologists. Now, psychologists don't usually treat schizophrenics because schizophrenics, besides, you know, those who are fortunate enough to get psychotherapy, they're also on medication. So it is psychiatrists who generally have much more familiarity with schizophrenics. And they were doing all these testings and so on, you know. And one of them, the psychologist, Dr. Reardon, who was the main one who the defense had, was saying something about, like, you can't diagnose unless you have give these psychological tests. Really? And how do psychiatrists diagnose all the time? They don't usually use tests. That's a psychologist thing. You really need to be able to diagnose from your examination of the person. You shouldn't need tests to prove one thing or the other. So it just, I'm just screaming at the television, you know, saying, no.
Because you don't believe that she was insane at the time, Dr. Carroll. Is that why you're frustrated? You don't believe it. Why don't you believe it, please?
Well, for one thing, even putting aside what her real diagnosis is, and notice that no expert witness or no mental health professional saw her until after she killed her mother, and some of them said she has PTSD and so on. So her psychiatric symptoms, you know, could well have to do with her having killed her mother, or at least some of them. Why don't I believe that? That she didn't know the wrongfulness? Well, for one thing, she covered it up. She did two things right at the time of the killing. One, when she tried to pretend that she was her mother, and two, when she tried to stage the murder scene so that it was an intruder. Now, if somebody is in the throes of a psychotic episode, they don't know to be able to do those kinds of things. Another thing is, you know, they're making a big deal of the fact that they don't know a motive. What would be the motive? They loved each other. Well, you know, they may well have loved each other, but it wasn't all perfect. It wasn't all perfect. So, you know, no one's telling the motive. She's not telling the motive. It doesn't mean that there isn't one. Clearly, things weren't all hunky-dory between the two of them, because the mother wrote those texts about scamming. You know, I think you're scamming me, or words to that effect. So I just hope the jury isn't buying it.
Okay, Dr. Carroll, appreciate you giving us, you know, your unfettered opinion here, and thank you for, you know, just not holding anything back. We appreciate it. And I got a note as you were talking here that the state, their last witness on rebuttal is a psychologist. So for what it's worth, you were saying, I'm frustrated there aren't psychiatrists. The defense did call one, as you acknowledged. They called three experts, you know, two who were psychologists, one psychiatrist, and now the fourth we're going to hear from from is a psychologist that the state is calling. What I find problematic about this, I'm not a mental health expert, but I am a lawyer, and I do know that when defendants get lodged in the jail, and Sergeant Pinkleton, you could speak to this, you get a case like this, any judge, looks at the case and you say, oh my gosh, this woman, killed her mother. What's the judge going to do? What's she going to order happen to her in that jail as soon as she tosses her in there, Sergeant?
First thing should be ordered is the psych eval. Absolutely off the bat, from the jump. She murdered her mother. This is not a common crime. It is not common for children to marry their parents. It does happen, but that immediately sends alarm bells, and that is the first thing that should have been done for this young woman. And she has PTSD. Yeah, she has PTSD now that she murdered her mother. That's why she has PTSD. Did not exhibit those symptoms before. Did not exhibit any symptoms of schizophrenia or any type of mental break. She was showing some sort of anxiety, I do believe that, but this is not, she knew what she was doing. This is a case of a woman who probably grew up being very sheltered, and this is just speculation from what I'm seeing and hearing and reading. Woman who grew up very sheltered, and then it was time to go to school, didn't really have quite the coping skills, didn't have quite the confidence and the time management, and things started to slip. And instead of when things started to slip, when things went bad, she didn't reach out for help, she started lying. And once you start lying, you got to lie about your other lie. And it's just a domino effect with lies. And then when she was getting ready to get caught, she finally got pushed out of school, and she was getting ready to get caught. And she knew, she was like, oh my gosh, I can't lie anymore. My mom is on the phone getting ready to find out everything. And I think that's when she just went, this can't happen. And she snapped. And not snapped in a, I don't know what I'm doing type of way, snapped in a, I can't let anyone find these lies out type of way. So, which is why she attacked and killed her mom, and then was able to come up with a story about being broken into and about the glass being broken and, oh, I don't know what happened. So I trust in juries. I believe that they will see through this. Her behavior in the courtroom was also, her body language is mimicking somebody who does not want to hear what they did. They're mimicking, she's like holding her hands down. Like, this is what 3- and 4-year-olds do. It's ironic. My 6-year-old niece just did it this weekend. She got in trouble and she just put her hands and she was blocking her ears, and it's called blocking. And it's what children do when they don't want to face what they've done. And all of these things are going on, and I hope the jury's picking up on it, because while she may have some underlying anxiety or other issues, this is not someone who has schizophrenia. And the majority of women who have schizophrenia, it doesn't even present until their 30s. Now, there can be situations where it does, but that's genuinely when it starts to present.
Sergeant, thank you for telling us how you really feel as well. You and Dr. Carroll on the same team on this one. I know this case is very polarizing. I've been loving all the comments I've been seeing on X. I'm not used to saying X, on X, formerly Twitter. People really split. Who knows? I feel like the only person that really knows is Sidney Powell. But I will say, what I can't wait to see, and this is the legal portion, Don Malarsic, we can bet our bottom dollar, is going to make a big deal about the fact. Now, wait for it. We talked about how the judge is going to order that mental health evaluation. Standard, any case like this, it's going to happen in the jail. There are psychiatrists and psychologists who work for jails around the country and that are going to do those evaluations in-house as soon as that person gets locked up. The state is not calling anyone who evaluated Sidney Powell. I don't know why. We're going to find out why, friends. We don't know why. We just know they are not. That could be a big problem.